We're in Isaiah chapter 7 through 9. And again, this is not a verse by verse, every part of Isaiah study we're going through. But as during the Easter period, I decided to read a lot of the Isaiah, and I just kept going. And it just struck me how much Isaiah is referenced in the New Testament and how many of the prophecies and just statements. And every time I ran across one, I was like, wait a minute, how come, especially the Pharisees, who probably knew Isaiah pretty well, didn't get it? And so we've been going back through Isaiah and kind of hitting the highlights of it. And we saw how at the very beginning, even though, again, they had a king that God was pleased with, and they were doing the right things, except for those little things up in the hills, those little problems, they were overall doing well. They had the temple going, they had the sacrifices going, the festivals, the Sabbath day, everything was rolling along, yet God was not happy. And the first message of Isaiah is, you got to get right in your heart. Because even though you are being very religious, and you're saying you love me, you're not loving one another. There is no justice. There is no goodness between each other. You're just out for whatever you can get, and that is not acceptable. And you got to get your heart right. And so we had that message going out to them, and even during the time of really good kings like Uzziah and Jotham, things were going well, but at the same time, their heart was still not right with God. And that was the constant message. And last week, we saw, as we had finally the calling of Isaiah. It's like, finally, chapter 6, finally, God comes to him and says, who can I send to give a message to these people? And it was good timing, too. Uzziah had just died, Jotham would take over, but how many know God probably knew what was going to happen next? That Jotham's son was not going to be a good king. And he was going to need somebody who was going to be kind of the face. Somebody that God could send and be the kind of the speaker for God to make sure the people stood on the right thing, because they weren't going to have that good king. And that's where we have the beginning of chapter 7. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 7, and let's pick up the story where we have a new king, and the king is Ahaz. Not Ahab, so we're not that bad. We're not Ahab bad, but we are Ahaz bad, okay? And King Ahaz, just so you know a little bit about him, stick something in Isaiah chapter 7 right there. And let's go back to 2 Chronicles 28 real quick. It is interesting, if you do want more about kind of the times of Isaiah, Chronicles is the better place to go than the Kings. The Kings are very limited in how they speak about these kings and what's going on. Chronicles, far more information about exactly what was going on. In fact, let's look at 2 Chronicles chapter 28, starting in verse 1. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. But he did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord, like David his father. For he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. Not good. Kings of Israel still were not good. They had a few along the way between Ahab, and they had a few good ones along the way, but not very one. In fact, it got really bad. And at this time, they did not have a good king in Israel. And he was walking in the ways of the kings of Israel and made also molten images of Balaam. So not only was he walking in their ways, but also he had made images of Balaam. Moreover, he burnt incense in the valley of the sons of Hinnom, and burnt his children in the fire after the abomination of the heathen whom the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. How bad was it? Not only was he, I know, this is a good Father's Day message, isn't it? It's like, we're going to get to that. It is actually a Father's Day message. He ain't the good example, though, because he is not only allowing people to go up into the mountains, he himself was going up. He also made images. He also went down the valley, and he burned incense, and he even burned his children as sacrifices to the gods of the people of Canaan. Is this a problem? Yep. He sacrificed also and burnt incense in the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. So his heart was not right with the Lord. So what happened? Verse 5, wherefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hand of the king of Syria, and they smote him and carried away a great multitude of them captives, and brought them to Damascus. And he was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who smote him with a great slaughter. So he gave him defeat. In fact, it's an interesting little story. We won't read the whole thing tonight. If you want to read about it, it's quite interesting because Judah, of which Ahaz is king, they were quite defeated by Syria and Israel. Pekah, king of Israel. In fact, they killed 120,000 and took 200,000 captive. Those are big numbers, very big numbers. And it's interesting because a prophet by the name of Oded, and you can see that in verse 9. Oded, God said, go talk to the king and tell him, king of Israel, go tell him that he shouldn't do this. That he's done enough bad things in his life. God's already not happy with him. Do not add to it the fact that you're killing your own people. Because they're really the same people, aren't they? They're still Israelites, aren't they? They're still God's. To kill your own kin and to take them captive is the wrong thing. And actually, they got a council together and they said, yeah, you're right. We don't want to make God any more mad than he already is. We're already horrible. So he actually sent them all back. so got a little bit of that, right? But that's not where it ends, because then King Pekah and the king of Syria decided to go after Jerusalem. In fact, let's go back there to Isaiah. Chapter 7. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 1. It came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin the king of Syria and Pekah the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. They had defeated them on the battlefield. They had taken many cities around. They had taken a lot from them, but they could not take Jerusalem. But they were still scared, because that's a formidable army, isn't it? Syria. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. Ephraim is Israel. So take that as a shorthand for them. And his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou and Shear-Jashub. And who is he? He is Isaiah's son. This is a Father's Day message. This is all about kids tonight. Some very special kids. And one of them is Shear-Jashub, thy son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field, and say unto King Ahaz, take heed and be quiet. Fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the two tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tebiel. That was their plan. Not only to come in and conquer, but actually set up their own relative to be the king. That's their plan, but who's in charge? God's in charge. Now, wait a minute, though. Aren't they bad? Isn't Judah bad? Isn't Ahaz bad? He's killing his children down there. And God's going to protect them? Yes, because they are still what? In fact, anybody know what Shear-Jashub means? There will always be a remnant, or a remnant will return. So even in the name, take him with you as a what? Sign. That yes, you're horrible. Yes, Ahaz, everything you're doing is wrong. Yes, I should wipe you off the face of the earth, but I'm not. Okay? Because I will keep my promise to David. I will keep my promise to Abraham. I will keep my promise to Jacob. I will keep my promise. And it was a sign that he took his son by that name with him to tell him what? Verse 7. Thus saith the Lord God, it shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years, everybody take out your math, 65 years, shall Ephraim be broken, that it not be people. So within 65 years, and it did come true, by the way, because God said so and because it's history. Within 65 years, Israel was no more. Who came in and destroyed them? Assyria. Not Syria, Assyria. Came in and wiped out Israel, the 10 tribes of the north, and took them away. And that's what God's saying. Don't worry about it. I got this under control. They will be no more. Verse 9, and the head of Ephraim is Samaria, that was their capital, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son. If you will not believe, surely you shall be established. Okay, you will. Even that it not be, no, I'm saying, surely you shall not be established if you will not believe. Okay? Trust me, trust me. In fact, his very next words are, I will give you a sign. I will give you a sign. You just ask what the sign is, and I will give you a sign to show that I, God, am in control. Now, if you're King Ahaz, and it says earlier, you're shaking like the trees in the wind, right? You're scared to death. You've had this great defeat out on the battlefield. You know you can't stand with them in battle. You're just hunkered down in the city. They're all around you. They're coming at you. What are you going to do? And God says, trust me, and just give me a sign. And you know what King Ahaz said? No, thanks. I've got this under control. I've got a plan. In fact, anybody want to guess what his plan was? 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 16 says his plan was to go to Assyria and get help from them. Now, Isaiah's going to go a little forward here and remind them that, oh, by the way, this Assyria you're talking about going and see them, they will destroy Israel. You know who else they're going to take out? You know who else they're going to come in and destroy a good bit of Jerusalem? You. You. Come on now. Don't go. Don't make your own plans. Don't. Trust me. Trust the Lord. Verse 10. Moreover, the Lord spake again unto Ahaz, saying, ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God, ask it either in the depth or in the height above. Doesn't matter. Some sign, something in the sky, something in the depth of the earth. You tell me anything you want to see, and I will give you the sign showing that I will do this. And he said, but Ahaz said, I will not ask. Neither will I tempt the Lord. I'm not going to test him. But what is he really saying? I don't need him. I've got my plans. I don't need to bother with God on this. We've got it. Was God happy? No. And I like how he says not tempt the Lord, because he's not supposed to tempt the Lord. We're not supposed to tempt the Lord, right? We're not supposed to test the Lord. Unless the Lord says what? Test me. It happens over and over in the Bible. It's amazing the number of times God comes and says, test me. And the guy's like, I don't want to. No, just test him. Solomon, by the way, when he was told test him, what did he do? Yeah, I want everything. I want wisdom. I want it. Verse 13, and he said, hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men, but you will weary my God also? You're doing a terrible job. You're making everybody's life miserable. And now you're trying to come after me. You're making my God's jobs harder by not trusting me. Therefore, the Lord himself shall give you a sign. All right, you won't ask for one? I'll give you one. Behold, a virgin shall give birth. Which brings the question, what child is this he's talking about? Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name, what? Emmanuel, God is with us. Now, this is one of the many times in Isaiah we have both a short-term fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. And in fact, even in the name, God is with us, it takes on two different twists. In this one, it is a sign that God is with them. God is on their side. God will protect them. God will defeat their enemies. God is with them. And of course, as we know, when the angel talks to Joseph and says, what? This is a sign. A virgin shall give birth, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. Then he means actually what? God is actually in your presence, is with you. So it's two different ways, and it was fulfilled. In fact, he says here, verse 15, butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. So both kings will die before that child basically comes to the point where they know to make decisions of right and wrong. Okay? Now, what child is this? you want to just go down a rabbit hole and do a lot of research, you can find it. We know one of the fulfillments is who? Jesus. Absolutely. And again, a sign that God is physically with us, but also God is on our side, right? Jesus Christ, the Messiah, was a sign to Israel that even though they were persecuted, even though they were in such dire straits, God is still with them. God will still keep his promises, right? And by the way, is that still a promise today? The fact that Jesus Christ did come, is that still a sign that God is with us and God will fulfill his promises, right? And that was the sign that was to be given to him. Now, we do not know, and by the way, virgin is young woman, could be one who never had a child before, or it could be many. In fact, one of the possible fulfillments was by Isaiah. Because right after this, guess who had a son? Isaiah had another son. In fact, let's go to that one. Let's go to chapter 8, verse 1. How many like easy to pronounce names? I always picture this guy on, Family Feud. Steve Harvey would have a fun time with this one. Chapter 8, verse 1. Moreover, the Lord said unto Isaiah, take thee a great roll and write in it with a man's pen concerning Mahir Shalal Hashbaz. Which means what? It means haste ye to the spoil. I will spoil your enemies, and you will take the blessing. So not only will they have victory over their enemies, as is promised as a sign by this child Emmanuel, God is with us, but also what? Another child is coming to say what? They will be blessed. They will receive the spoil. In fact, verse 2, and I took unto me faithful witnesses to record, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jebechiah. Sure. And I went up to the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son. Then said the Lord to me, call his name Mahir Shalal Hashbaz. So it's Father's Day. See? Now he's got two sons now. In fact, look at verse 18 of chapter 8. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord hath given me are for what? Signs, and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, which dwells in Mount Zion. These, both of his children, and probably even other children he had, I don't know what their names were, but they were all signs because of their names and because of when they were conceived and where they were born. They were all signs to the people that God is with them. They will have the victory. There will always be a remnant, and they will have the spoil. Okay? And by the way, did that happen? Yes. In fact, look at verse 4, I'm sorry. For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of who? Assyria. Assyria is coming. And they will take them away. And they will take the spoil thereof. And by the way, God will take care of his people, won't he? The remnant. Not everybody, because they don't all believe. Remember he said, if you believe, then you shall be free. No, some will believe and some won't, right? But for those who believe, they will find spoil. Verse 5. The Lord spake also unto me again, saying, for as much as this people refuses the waters of Shiloah that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son. Now he turns here and basically says, I will have my way. I will take care of it. Assyria is going to come, but for as much as this people will not listen. In fact, I find it interesting that Shiloah, we call it in the New Testament the fountain of Siloam. What happened in the fountain of Siloam? We had this last Sunday. Who went and washed in the fountain of Siloam? The blind man. Even in that, if I was a Pharisee, I'd think, oh boy, this guy washed in the fountain. Didn't Isaiah say something about those Siloam fountains and not seeing, not perceiving? Maybe we should. Maybe we shouldn't refuse the waters of Siloam and be able to see, right? There's so many allusions here. It's amazing. So Verse 7, now therefore, behold, the Lord brings upon them the waters of the rivers strong and many, even the king of Assyria and all his glory, and he shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks, and he shall pass through, where? Judah too, because they're not listening either, are they? He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall he fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. And remember, Emmanuel's the name of the Son, which is supposed to be a reminder that God will protect, but if they do not believe, he is with them, but if they do not listen, they will be punished too, won't they? So he says to them in verse 9, associate yourselves, O you people, and you shall be broken in pieces. If you go try to make an association with Assyria, if you try to go down to Egypt, if you try to get somebody else, if you try to come to anybody else other than God, you are going to be broken in pieces. And give ear, all ye far countries, gird yourselves, and you shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and you shall be broken in pieces. And when they repeat it twice, that's emphasis, isn't it? If you try to fight this, if you try to fight God's messenger, which is Assyria, you are going to lose. Verse 10, take counsel together, and it shall come to nothing. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God is with us. Try as you might. Try to do it yourself. Try to figure out yourself. Try to counsel together, but God is with his people, right? Does that mean they're going to get off scot-free? No, because if his people will not listen, he will have to what? Punish them. But there will always be a what? A remnant. A what? A, how do you say his name? Shir Bazabaz. Yeah, that guy. That son of Isaiah. There'll always be a remnant, but God will, right? Punish. Verse 11, for the Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand, instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, say not a confederacy to all them whom this people shall say a confederacy. Don't. This goes for us too, doesn't it? Is the world against us? Yeah, I mean, Satan, the world, they're against the truth. They're against us. So who should we try to get a confederacy with to defeat the enemy? God only. God only. Don't make our confederacy with this group or that group or this group or that group. No. Who do we make a confederacy with? Who do we associate with? Who do we come together? Who is with us? God is with us. Do not turn from him. In fact, look at verse 13. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself. Him alone. And let him be your fear alone. And let him be your dread alone. Right? He's begging them. Listen. Oh, yes, it's fearful. Yes. You got these two armies out. They're still sitting out there. It's like, yeah, but God will take care of it. All you need to do is trust the Lord. Right? But what happens instead? Verse 14. And if you do make him your dread and make you fear, he shall be a sanctuary. That's good. But if you do not, he will be what? A stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offense to both the house of Israel, for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken. In fact, what does 2 Peter say? 1 Peter, I'm sorry. Keep something in Isaiah. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 7. Because he references back to Isaiah here. 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 7. First Peter chapter 2, verse 7. Unto you, therefore, which believe. Believe in who? Believe in Jesus Christ, who is the rock, right? He, Jesus, is precious. He is a sanctuary. He is a firm foundation, right? But unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner. And a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. So Peter even references back to this, right? They have a choice. Either he is what? A stumbling stone or a sanctuary? Which is he going to be? And back then it was God. Are you going to trust God? Are you going to look to him, or are you going to look to man to save you? And unfortunately, too many of them said, we're going to look to man to save us. And they failed, and Assyria came in, and it's going to happen. Today it's what? You either have Jesus Christ as your bedrock and your rock, and you trust him as your cornerstone, or you don't. Back then it was trust God or not, either sanctuary or stumbling stone. Now it is trust Christ or not, either a sanctuary or a stumbling stone. And he's giving them this choice that they need to make. So let's go back to Isaiah chapter 8 again. And which choice are they going to make? It's been laid out, right? But let's face it, they've got a terrible king. Society's going downhill. Even though Isaiah has laid it all out, that this is going to happen. In fact, if you don't get this thing turned around, Assyria is coming, and don't put your trust in them. Look at verse 19. And when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep, I like that, and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God for the living to the dead? And basically saying, even at that time, they were looking to wizards, necromancers. They were actually looking to people to ask dead bodies and to give answers from dead bodies. These are people who were burning their children in the valley, so this is not too wacky for them. They thought this was great. And he says here, what? Shouldn't you ask questions of the living God instead of dead people? To the law, verse 20, to the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no what? Light in them. You need to seek the light. You need to not be those, and that's the people that Ahaz was listening to, frankly. Ahaz was listening to those spiritists and those of other religions and those who were doing those things, getting advice from them. And his message is not to him, but to all the people. Stop listening to them. Listen to the one God. Listen to the truth. And if you do not listen to the truth, you are walking in darkness. In fact, verse 21, and they shall pass through it hardly bestead and hungry, and it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves and curse their king and their God and look upward. This isn't the only time. This is in Revelation 2, where basically when things are going wrong and the judgment of God is on people, I'm amazed how many times God realizes that our response when things go wrong and God is punishing us, it is, boy, this is God's fault. In the book of Revelation, I love what it says. It's because they will not acknowledge him as God, but will blame him and curse him. So in other words, I hate you, God, even though you don't exist. It's all your fault, but you aren't really there. But it's the same thing, isn't it? And they will actually curse their true God because of all the things that are going on, when it's happening because they turned from their God to these other quote-unquote gods. Verse 22, and they shall look unto the earth and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish, and they shall be driven to darkness. That's terrible. This is a terrible Father's Day message, isn't it? But there's hope. Chapter 8 gives us the third child. We have Emmanuel, we've got the meerkat, I don't know what his name is. Meershalub. We've got him, but we also have a third child here. And this is one also you're very familiar with. Chapter 9. Nevertheless, another great phrase in the Bible. They're in darkness, they're in dimness, they've avoided the light, they've turned against God to these other gods. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in their vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations. And basically, why would he bring up Zebulun and Naphtali here? Why would he raise them as an example of God's punishment? Because it is from the land of Zebulun and Naphtali that who is coming? The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. And he's telling them that there is hope, even hope. And put this all together for a second. Judah is the one that remains, right? They are the ones, they're taken off to Babylon, but they come back. They're the remnant. But I want you to notice something. Where does Jesus come from? He's a Jew. I mean, he's from Judah. He's line of Judah. He's of David. But where does he come from? He comes from the land of Israel. Even in the darkness of Israel, which is even more dark than the darkness of Judah, even out of that darkness, God can bring a light, can he? And it was a line of Judah from Zebulun and Naphtali area known as Galilee, that he's saying here, even out of that dark pit up there, I am going to bring a light. Verse 3. Thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. For thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulders, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. Remember Midian? That's the story of Gideon. Gideon broke the back of the Midianites with God's great help, right? And lifted them up. It was lifted up off the people of Israel. And they will rejoice in that day, and they will rejoice to know that their oppressor is gone. Who is this one who will come and help them? Verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called what? Wonderful, Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. And I've never picked up until I realized kind of where this is in Isaiah, how important it is that he will establish it with judgment and with what? Justice. It is not just a religious, government. It's not just one that's focused on religious and going and sacrifices and all the things that those. It's based on what? A society that does what is right. And we will have a king at some point who will actually do that. And we know his name to be what? How do we know it's Jesus? Well, let's go to Luke. Luke chapter 1, verse 31. And this is the message to Mary, the mother. What was the message to the father, Joseph? A sign of victory, right? A child is coming. You shall call his name Emmanuel. God is with us, right? That was the message to the father. What was the message to the mother? Luke chapter 1, verse 31. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. He shall be great and shall be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David, and he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom there shall be no end. So here we have the promise that he, like in Isaiah, he shall be what? The king to sit on the throne of his father David. Right? And bring what? Justice and judgment. Right? And where is he going to come from? Matthew chapter 4, last place. Matthew chapter 4, verse 12. Matthew chapter 4, verse 12. This is the very beginning of his ministry. Now, when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into where? Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the sea coast, and the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled which was spoke of Isaiah the prophet, saying, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people which sat in darkness saw great light, and to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, light it sprung up. From that time Jesus began to preach and to say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So at the very beginning, it's reminded, this was a promise that Isaiah said, right? And we see that in these signs of these children. There was one brought to what? A sign of victory. God is with us. Emmanuel. A virgin shall give birth. And mean God is with us. We will have the victory. Another son was born. Maybe it fulfills that one. I don't know. But another one that means what? Spoil. Haste to spoil. God will bless. God will bring you through. God will be your sanctuary. Or what? It'll be a stumbling block. One of the two. But even though we will fail, Israel was going to fail, Judah was going to fail, still, was there going to be hope? Because even out of the darkness, a light would come. Okay? So this is the promise of Isaiah. And I thought it would be good to kind of do all three of these together to remind us of just how clear God is in all this. And the hard thing about doing this study is remembering how long before it happened Isaiah wrote these things. And you're reading through Isaiah and you're going, oh yeah, I know that happened. Oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah. No, he's writing this hundreds of years before they happen. Before Israel is even taken over by Assyria, before they even go into captivity, before all of that, God already knows, doesn't he? And by the way, let's not lose the sight here that is the choice still there for us today? Our choice is still to know that God is with us, right? It's also still there to know that we can make him either our sanctuary or a stumbling block. And also to hope in the one who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, right? And by the way, only part of that's been fulfilled. That son has come, but he has not sat on his throne yet. He will sit on his throne in what city? Jerusalem. And will he judge with justice and judgment? And will the world like it? No, but they don't like anything good. So, well, that's a story for another day. So I want to roll through those. Now, next week, we will actually jump to chapter 11, where we see a very clear statement about the Messiah and the Savior to come, as it really lays out who he's going to be.